See, I had grown up my whole life thinking that this monster was my dad. They flew my biological father in from Southern California, and they introduced me to my dad. And I remember just crying. And for the first time in my life, a man was hugging me. He kissed me on the lips, and he's like, "I love you, son, and I'm so sorry." And it was so foreign to me. Like, this is what love feels like. And this is how God was so in this, because just a couple days later, what I once thought was my real father came home, and he murdered my mother, he murdered my sister, and then shot himself in the head. So within the matter of just 48 hours, I lost an entire family, but gained a whole nother family that I never even knew I had.
This podcast explores stories of people who invest their lives to serve others. The topics and interviews in this show are intended to inspire all of us to live our best story so others can fully discover the kingdom effect. Hey guys, welcome to the Kingdom Effect. We're here again. This is episode, what is this, Glenn? Episode
13, I think.
Episode 13 with Scott Thorson. We're excited to hear more about him. I'm going to let Glenn introduce him because he's friends with Glenn. It's my first time to meet Scott, so I'm excited for tonight. Before we get started, Glenn, what you been up to this week?
Man, just same old. Yeah, paperwork, court, Netflix, YouTube. Same old story, yep.
Yeah. We're glad to have a guest back tonight. Last week it was just the two of us, and that was a ton of fun. We got to talk a little bit more than we usually do, but glad to have a guest back this week. You want to introduce our guest this week?
Yeah, man. So this is my buddy Scott Thorson. Scott and I, we've been buddies probably 10 years at least, if not more than that. Scott is here tonight to talk about a nonprofit that he works with and supports called the Dream Center. It's here in Jackson. So Scott, with that said, why don't you tell everybody what the Dream Center is and a little bit about what they do?
I've worn a lot of hats as a social worker, and I've worked for a lot of organizations, starting with being a probation officer, teaching a batterers intervention program, and transitioned into working for the Department of Children's Services. And then I got an awesome opportunity to work for the Dream Center. And what the Dream Center is, it's a transitional housing for women and children who have fallen upon hard times. And everybody's hard time looks different. Everybody's bottom looks different. So there's some families that are there because they're struggling with substance abuse. There's people there who struggled with homelessness and mental illness. That it's a transitional housing program that doesn't provide a handout, but it provides a hand up to get out of the pit of destruction that women and children sometimes find themselves in. And one of the reasons why I love advocating so much for the Dream Center is, out of all of the jobs that I've had as a social worker, by far the Dream Center was the most spiritually fulfilling place that I've ever worked at. I currently work as a domestic violence victims advocate. We often use the Dream Center as a place to provide a safe haven for women who are escaping domestic violence. The greatest thing about the Dream Center is it's Christ-centered, Christ-focused, and you and I know that really there's no way out of the pits that we sometimes find ourselves in other than through Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. We might find temporary relief. We might find, a pot of gold, but that pot of gold goes away just as quickly as we got it. It isn't until we experience that interchange that Christ brings to us. And that's what the Dream Center is all about. It's about introducing these women to the one true doctor who can heal them, and that's Jesus Christ.
Man, that's awesome, dude. Working in law enforcement for so many years, I'd heard about the Dream Center, knew about the Dream Center, but it wasn't really until I got into the nonprofit world and really, trying to serve women and children in our community that I really got to get a better understanding of what the Dream Center is and what they do. And, got to go to the gala this past year. That was awesome. Actually got me a piece of art that was painted by some of the women and children. Just a great organization. When you're driving down the road or walking downtown and you see a homeless person, my heart breaks for them. But at the same time, like, I'm just clueless on how to minister to someone in that population. Can you give me some advice, or people like me some advice, that man, we're just driving down the road and we do see that, or we come across someone within that population. Can you tell us what we can do just on a face-to-face personal basis to serve these people?
What I find helpful is that I personalize it. What if that was my son? What if that was my daughter? How would I want somebody to treat them? Would I want somebody to treat them like, oh, there's just someone who's too lazy to work? Or would I want someone to show them actual empathy and compassion? Because many of us, even myself with a college degree and working on a salary job, I'm one paycheck away from possibly finding myself in that same situation. And I think it's important that, if at all possible, personalize those people that you run into and that you see.
At Groove Life for a Devo one day, but we had Shower Up come in, and the director of Shower Up, basically before his talk started, we asked everybody, if you woke up tomorrow and had, for no fault of your own, ended up homeless, what would you miss most? And people from the audience were jumping in, and some would say they would miss their bed, or they would miss their shower, or their, the ease of keeping themselves clean. And after about 10 or 12 responses, he looked at the crowd and said, those are all great answers, but they're not what you would miss most. What you would miss most was your dignity. Like the fact that no one ever looks you in the eyeball as a human being anymore. And man, it broke me down and helped me to, kind of view that whole situation from a whole different perspective.
When you've been in that situation personally, that's absolutely correct. The amount of dignity that you lose. I was actually homeless for about 3 years, living on a park bench, going from shelter to shelter, trying to get food. There was a point in my life where I would camp out behind Pizza Hut right after the lunch hour because I knew that they couldn't save the pizza from the lunch buffet. So if I was lucky enough, it would still be in the box and it would be in the trash, and I could just eat the pizza right out of the trash. So I know what it's like to be down there, and I know what it's like for people to look at you like you're less than a human being.
Wow. Now, Scott, tell us, I didn't realize that about your story. Tell us how you ended up there, what your mindset was when you were in that place, and then how did you pull out of it?
I don't know if we have enough time, but I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning because it's all relevant. And before I even get into that, I want to start by quoting one of my favorite scriptures, and that's, all things work together for good for those who love him, for those who are called according to his purpose. And I grew up a majority of my life hating God, thinking, how could anything good come from the life that I've had to live? I was a small child and I never felt any love from my father. He was a very cold man. He was very unaffectionate and a very abusive man. And I remember there were many nights where my room was adjacent from my parents' room, and I could hear him just mercilessly beating my mother. I could hear him raping my mother. As a child, I had a really skewed idea of what love looked like. And it caused me to act out in ways that are totally inappropriate, so much so that my mom decided that she was going to put me in a rehabilitation hospital for troubled youth. And while I was at that hospital, my doctors told my mom that, look, Scott needs to know that this monster who beats you, this monster who rapes you, this man who is incapable of loving him, you got to tell Scott that that's not his real father. See, I had grown up my whole life thinking that this monster was my dad, that he was actually a part of me and I was a part of him. They flew my biological father in from Southern California, and this is how God works. Although I couldn't see it at the time, I can clearly see it now that he's in my heart and in my life. But they flew my father in, and I remember being in the quiet room with my doctors and my therapist, and they introduced me to my dad. And I remember just crying. And for the first time in my life, a man was hugging me. A man, he kissed me on the lips, and he's like, I love you, son, and I'm so sorry. And it was so foreign to me. Like, this is what love feels like. And this is how God was so in this. Because just a couple days later, what I once thought was my real father came home, and he murdered my mother, he murdered my sister, and then shot himself in the head. So within the matter of just 48 hours, I lost an entire family, but gained a whole nother family that I never even knew I had. I had 5 brothers and sisters that lived in Southern California. I had a father who wanted so bad to make up for the time that he had lost. But by that time in my life, I was broken. I didn't know Christ. I was an emotional wreck. I had attachment disorders. I had no way of expressing love. I didn't know what love looked like. And so at a very young age, I turned to drugs and alcohol, and I got really bad in my addiction for a while and went to a drug treatment program, and I got clean and I got sober. I got the healthy part back, but I never truly got my mind back. And I found a new form of addiction. My best friend introduced me to a boxing gym, and I'll never forget walking into that kickboxing gym for the very first time and putting a pair of boxing gloves on. And I looked at the coach and I'm like, so I can hit him and not go to jail? And this is not a place of self-inflation, but I was so full of hate and I was so full of rage and anger at all the things that I had experienced. The fighting part just came natural. And within 6 months, I was the California state kickboxing champion. It had happened that quick. And as I continued to fight, I did gain somewhat of a skill set, and I continued to climb the ranks, and I continued to use that as my new form of addiction, my new form of being validated, when in reality, nothing ever worked because I was still that same little boy who was just empty and broken inside.
That happens really often. I want to hear the rest of your story for sure, but just interjecting here. It's interesting because we think of things like addictions and negative things that those steal away our identity, but we're just as susceptible to it. Like people in ministry get addicted to pats on the backs when they do their ministry, or people like Glenn that's in human trafficking victims. I don't know, we get full of ourselves, right? So it's on the good and the bad side, the positive and the negative, where we come up with these addictions that just make us feel better on the inside, right?
But they truly never do. It's a superficial change. It's not a lasting change. And it's definitely not a lasting feel good, because when the crowds are gone and when people aren't chanting your name, you still have to go home and you still have to sleep with you. And you still have to lay your head down on the pillow and realize how broken you really are. And that was evident through my first marriage. I had everything. I had a wife who loved me and adored me. And through my inability to know how to experience love or how to give it back, that marriage was broken from the very beginning, ultimately ending in a divorce and ultimately ending in me relapsing to the only thing that I knew to fall back on. And if I didn't have my fighting, and if I didn't have that validation from, as embarrassing as it is, she was never really my wife. She was just a piece of property. And because that's where I was at. I didn't know how to have a wife, because of being a husband and a wife, that's something that you reciprocate back and forth. It's 100%. And I didn't know how to do that. And as heartbreaking as it is, I had 2 little girls that adored their champion daddy. They didn't know how broken I was on the inside. And I abandoned them. I just up and left, and I moved up to Oregon, where a friend of mine owned a strip club, and I took a job working as a bartender at a strip club, and just fell right back full-fledged into my addiction. And I'll never forget sitting there in the room, and one of the dancers' connections shot me up for the very first time. And I'll never forget putting my arm out there and watching that needle go in. And I'll never forget that feeling of euphoria that I got when that drug hit my heart, and I coughed and I gasped for a breath of air, and I slid down the wall, and I held my heart, and I said, this is it. I'm going to die. And it's not because I'm going to overdose right now. I believed in my heart that I was going to die because I was never going to stop chasing that feeling of euphoria. For the first time in my life, I felt good. That's a fallacy. That's exactly what the devil wanted me to think. That's exactly the lie that Satan wanted to push into my head. And within a matter of just a few weeks, I lost my job working at the bar. I became homeless, living on the corners, begging for money, eating pizza out of the dumpster at Pizza Hut. It happens that quick. And by the grace of God, just 3 years into that homelessness, I got arrested on an outstanding warrant, and God showed up in a big way, in the form of the Longview Police Department. And I served just enough time in jail to come to my senses to realize, oh my God, what did I do? I hadn't called my daughters in 3 years.
Wow.
I found out later that my ex-wife was actually calling the Red Cross and to see if I was dead. She actually told my oldest daughter that, your daddy's probably dead. And no child should have to bury their father like that. But that's how I got to that place of homelessness. That's how I got to that place of just being completely and utterly lost.
Scott, tell us about that when you met Jesus, man. I'd love to hear how you transitioned from everything you've just said to, when Jesus really just got your attention, man. Like, I'd love to hear that.
After I got out of jail, I started going to AA meetings, NA meetings, SA meetings. If it was an anonymous 12-step program, you would find my butt parked in that seat, and they said, I don't care if it's a doorknob, but you got to find a God. Well, I always knew that there was a Jesus. I just didn't know Jesus. And he still wasn't present in my life, even through my stint with Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. Just as is in my nature, I went from one addiction to another addiction to another addiction. It was drugs and alcohol, then it was the kickboxing, and then it was going to AA meetings and NA meetings, and then it was the form of having this great new high-paying construction job. And, then I met my second wife. We were going through a really rough time. And I got on my hands and knees. I said, God, if you're really there, please show me that you're there. And he restored that marriage. And we ended up moving. We said, God, wherever you want to take us, God, wherever it is that we can go, just let's get in the car and let's leave and go someplace. And he brought us from Washington State right to Milan, Tennessee. And I remember our first week in Milan, Tennessee, there was a little church called Temple Baptist Church. And I remember we went on a Wednesday night, and I was sitting in the front row, and I'm going to get choked up, but in the front row, and the pastor there, it was like God spoke to him and said, you need to talk to this guy right here. And that pastor looked at me, didn't know who I was from Adam. He says, I see I have a visitor on the front row. We usually don't see visitors on Wednesday nights, but I hope you find what you're looking for. And at that moment, I realized that I was lost. And then they started talking about, if you were to die tonight, are you 100% sure that you know where you're going to go? And I didn't, because one of the things that kept me from knowing God is because I knew just enough about God to know how perfect he is and how could God love me. I had robbed, I had burglarized, and I'm not too proud to say, because this is where my addiction took me. This is where my sin took me. I prostituted myself to get drugs. How could God forgive a man who committed so many abominations? How could God love me? And then I remember the associate pastor there opened up the Bible, and he took me to Romans row, and he says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and God loves you. And I remember when Jesus came into my heart, all of that guilt and all of that sin was lifted from me. All of the things that had kept me from coming to God were gone. And that euphoria that I thought I felt when I stuck that needle in my arm, it doesn't hold a candle to the cleansing I felt when Jesus came into my heart. That's how I got saved. And that was the best day of my life. Absolutely best day of my life. And this is how funny God works. I was still working for a big construction company. I was still making great money working in construction. My wife at the time we had just lost a baby, and she had just gotten pregnant again. I'm on a roof working, and I broke my back. And I lay down there and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And I'm like, God, I don't know what you have planned for me, but your will be done. Whatever it is that you want me to do. And I could almost hear a voice that said, I've molded you, and I've brought you to this point to be more than just a roofer. And I was called. I went back to school, and I got my social work degree so that I could do what I was truly called to, so that I could help the people that have been broken just like me. And my favorite scripture in the Bible is 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3-5. It says, "Blessed be God, the God of comfort, who comforts us in all of our trials, so that we may one day comfort those who are going through the same tribulations that God once comforted us for." That's why I'm a social worker,
Yeah.
because
Man,
God has brought me through all of those things so that I can share not only my book knowledge that I gained in college, but my life experiences, to let people know that, you know what, there's a way out of this. And oftentimes in the social work field, we're discouraged from mentioning Jesus Christ, because we need to be all inclusive, and we need to make sure nobody feels less than if they don't believe the same way that we believe. And that's just empowered me to want to make sure that no matter who I talk to, no matter where I'm at, no matter what situation comes at me, I can do two things. I can show them the love of Jesus Christ through the way that I treat them, without ever having to mention his name. And secondly, when I run into some of the people that we serve, the drug addicts, the prostitution, the batterers, all of the people who do these things that society says are so horrible, and I find myself with compassion fatigue, and I find myself saying they're just trying to milk the system, then God quickly reminds me that there's nothing any of these people that you serve have done that I haven't already forgiven you for. And it kind of snaps you back into reality. Like, everybody is worth a second, a third, a fourth chance, because God knows he's given me 1,000. He's given me 1,000. So I'm passionate. I love my job as a social worker. And more importantly, I love being able to talk about Jesus. When I'm working in my field, and we're a non-faith-based company where I currently work, when someone mentions Jesus, it's the green light that I can talk about God. I can't mention it until they talk. But man, once they say Jesus, it opens up that entire book, that whole tool belt that the Bible contains. And I can just give them tool after tool after tool of the relief that God truly can lift you from the pit of destruction. He can cure all your diseases and all your illnesses. That alcoholism, it's not incurable. It's curable. That a drug addiction, it's not incurable. Don't let society tell you that. There is a cure, and it's found in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I remember you and I were talking, maybe it was yesterday, Scott, and we were talking about those times when you can't necessarily verbally talk about Jesus the way you want to sometimes because of restrictions at your job and things like that. But one of the things you said is that even if I can't say it, they can see it in the way that I live my life, and the way that I love the people that I'm talking to. One of my favorite quotes is by St. Francis: "Share Jesus with others, and if you have to, use words."
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been something I like to hang my hat on, because you've got the restrictions, from different organizations or the government or whatever the case may be, but then you've also got people that just hear Jesus and they automatically shut down and they turn and run, just because you're talking religion and you're talking religious. And what they don't realize is that you can love them like Christ, and you can show them Christ in the way you live, and they're seeing Jesus and they don't even know it. It's kind of like you're sneaking a little Jesus in there on them. That's always been just an exciting thing for me. And that quote, I love that quote. I'm going to get it tattooed somewhere, Kevin.
That's awesome.
I think that my faith came full circle when a few years ago, I started this talk with Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love him, for those who are called according to his purpose. A few years back, I was in my Uncle Johnny's house in Chicago, and I was looking through some of my mom's things, and there was a letter from an organ donor company. And it turns out that my mom was an organ donor. Although it was a tragic loss in my life, number one, God healed her that day. She'll never cry. She'll never experience an ounce of pain again. Mom's physical body saved. The people who got the kidneys, the people who got the heart, the people who got the liver. I mean, But we serve a bigger God than that. It's not just about the physical lives that might have been saved. I guarantee that that person who now gets to live, who was on the verge of death, who got some kidneys, they're telling people that there's a God. And then those people are telling people about Jesus. And then those people are telling people about Jesus. There's no telling how many people may have come to know Christ through that horrible day that my mom passed away. That's the God that I serve.
That's what we talk about on the, that's the whole purpose or the idea behind this show, Scott, is how the things we do, the life we live, how that ultimately affects the kingdom as a whole. Right on, man, with what you just said.
I was just so struck as you was telling your story. You have come to a place where you can tell that story with that much vulnerability and that much honesty. There's a guy in Seattle named Dan Allender that wrote a book called To Be Told. And his premise for the book is that you're not really healed, like you've not really made it to the other side of your trauma until you can tell about it, until you can share it with people and tell it as a story. One of the great things about learning how to tell it as a story is that's when it starts to impact and affect other people. If you just keep it inside and hold it in and never tell the story, then it's pointless. There's no purpose in the pain that you went through, which goes back to kind of what you were saying is God, probably theologically, he doesn't cause those things to happen to us, but he is the God of redemption. Like he takes everything the enemy means for evil and uses it for good. And so that redemption in the story, like once you can tell the story, it's just amazing. So like just to our listeners, I would encourage you. I've been saying this lately, but all last year for me, the entire year, what God was surfacing in me was he was taking the blinders off my eyes to realize that the things that we hear about happening all other parts of the world, most of those things are happening in some form right under our noses, right in our backyard. You know, the amount of pain in the world, in our lives, the percentage of people that have gone through some form of trauma, if all of those stories could be told, how much hope would that give, you know, to those listening? So thank you so much for being willing to open up and be honest and vulnerable. It means a ton to us. Tell us about how you transitioned from being on the streets, and you told a little bit of the story, but how do you regain enough confidence to go to school and start a career and be where you are today?
I believe that I was tempted by the devil to give up. Here I am working in construction. I have a pregnant wife. What am I going to do? I'm laying there with a broken back, and I'm told by the doctors you'll never work construction again. It was meant to break me, but God used it for good. And I went back to school, and I decided that I wanted to become a social worker. I wanted to be able to do something that could help people. And that was going to be the perfect avenue. Little did I know that it was going to be an avenue where I could use to continue to praise God and to be able to introduce even more people to Jesus Christ and the relationship that they can have with him.
I think it's that thing, Kevin, you know, when you feel called to a specific purpose or call in your life, I think God just fuels you. Like he takes away the fear. You ask me all the time, you know, how do you go in kicking hotel doors down and guns blazing and, you know, bad guys in the room? And when people ask me that, it's like, oh yeah, that is dangerous, isn't it? Like, I don't know, man. It's like God just takes away that fear and gives you that confidence that it basically, I told you to do this, so go do it. I got it. You know, as long as you go do it, I got you.
It's amazing. That's so true. I mean, I was not by any means a scholar in high school. And here I am, you know, I was back in my 40s getting ready to start school all over again after barely graduating high school, thinking, how am I going to do this? And not only was I able to graduate with a college degree, I graduated from Union University with a 4.0 GPA because God was the one that strengthened me, and he gave me that perseverance to finish the race and to finish the race strong.
I'm going to ask an honest question, and it could be potentially controversial, but I'm interested in your thoughts about this. But and it goes kind of back to Glenn's question earlier about how do you help someone on the street? You know, I don't often stop with homeless people, but there's two particular instances in my life that has made it harder for me to stop. And they both had to do with, like, I was brought to tears for people who were in a homeless state. One in particular was in Daytona, Florida. I was probably like 20 years old, and I was on the beach just sharing the gospel, and started praying for this guy to get off the street. And literally, he stopped me and he said, "Don't ever pray that for me again." He was saying, "This is my family, and this is where I live. This is my home." So it's really hard sometimes when you see that kind of response to know what can I say, what can I do, or is it even my responsibility to determine if I should help someone or not? So what are your thoughts on that?
It's our responsibility to offer the help, and whether they want to take it, that's entirely on them. I see oftentimes in our field of work is that we will lead them to water, but we can't force them to drink. A lot of people are very content in just going from one nonprofit to another nonprofit to another nonprofit to get as much as they possibly can without working for it. And our goal as social workers is to empower the clients that we serve to be able to realize that they can do this on their own, to give them the tools that they need. And all we can do is provide those resources, but we can't do it for them. We can't force them to do anything that they don't want to do.
What's the difference in someone in that state of mind versus you, who obviously was ready, to come out? I don't know. What's the difference?
Well, that's a great question. Divine intervention. It was just my time. Everything lined up accordingly. He knew the plans that he had for me. And it was just a process from realizing that there is no substitute. There's nothing that's going to fill that hole in your heart. Now that you're clean from drugs, we'll see. We'll let you try, because God will give you enough. I mean, he'll always be behind you, but he's going to let you walk wherever you want to walk. There's his perfect will and there's his permissive will. And as long as I was walking in his permissive will and doing what I wanted to do to make me feel good, no matter where I sought to get that, whether it was through legitimate employment, whether it was through drug addiction, whether it was through my kickboxing, whether it was through failed marriages, it wasn't until I found him that I actually found my purpose. And I finally filled that empty space that was in my heart.
Good, well said, man. Good stuff. I had a similar experience, Kevin. It was a homeless guy that was coming to our church. My wife and I were like, man, his name is Dave. I'm like, man, let's invite Dave over to the house. And Dave comes over to the house and takes a shower, and we had an extra bedroom and washed all his clothes and cooked a good meal. And I wake up the next morning and, Dave's sleeping on the floor. Like he wouldn't even sleep on the bed, and then I'm sitting down with Dave at breakfast and I'm like trying to make a plan on how to rescue Dave from homelessness. Let's get your driver's license. Let's do this. Let's do that. All of a sudden, for weeks at a time, Dave didn't show back up to church. And I was like, oh man, I messed up somehow. What happened? Eventually ran back into Dave, and Dave was like, man, you scared the heck out of me. I didn't know what to think, and it's like what you said, that he was so comfortable. Maybe comfortable is not a good word. Maybe he was just in a place where he wasn't afraid of his current, where he's at. And all of a sudden I'm throwing all this change and stuff at him, and it scared him to death. And I think my takeaway from that was, man, it's not my job to fix him. It's not my job to make him not homeless anymore. It's my job to look at him the same way I look at Kevin, the same way I look at Scott, and treat him the same way and love him the same way, and be there and be like, brother, anything you need, I'm here.
The same way Christ looks at us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's one thing that I see in you, Scott, is humility. God has given you a path that has probably pretty easily led to humility, because of what you've been through. And I actually have, stories in my past as well that, I'm not saying I'm not claiming humility, but that's, made me more humble. And sometimes the hardest path to humility are those who haven't gone through those kind of struggles, right? Like just the realization is striking that, those guys I was just talking about that rejected my prayers and help on the street, they're no different from me at all. Like there's zero difference between my bent to turn away from God and walk my own path. My path in the world's eyes, maybe it's prettier or more what people would think of as normal, but to God, any form of rejection is equal, and we've all rejected him, right? So yeah, just sometimes like some of the hard things I've been through in life, and you as well, is like you embrace them, accept them, and you actually have some measure of gratitude for them because of where they brought you, right? So that's what I see in you, man. I didn't know what to expect tonight with this interview, but I think it's my favorite episode ever. Just
That's sweet,
hearing your
man.
story.
Yeah.
So,
And that says a lot, Scott. I hope you know that's probably the best compliment I've ever heard Kevin say. Because, man, well, hey, Scott, before we get out of here, I'm going to circle back around real quick to the Dream Center, and it is dreamcenterjackson.com. Obviously, on the website, there's a ton of ways. It explains how you can get involved and support them. But Scott, if you would, other than financially, obviously that is every nonprofit needs help financially. But what are some other ways that people can get plugged in?
Well, the most important way is the obvious way, and that is to pray for God's will to continue to be done, for souls to continue to be saved through the work that the Dream Center does. It's an amazing ministry for Christ. Definitely monetary donations are always needed in attempts to get that building built. And before I go into all the materialistic things that the Dream Center can benefit from, one of the most heartbreaking things that I've seen is I was up in the executive director's office. There was a stack, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women and children who need a place to stay, applications for people who have put in an application to stay at the Dream Center. And right now, until that new building gets built, there's only so many beds that are available. And I've lost sleep at night wondering how many victims of domestic violence are going to die because they didn't have a place to go. How many drug addicts are going to shoot up for the last time because there wasn't a bed available? And that's what kills me, is to know that there's a stack of hundreds and hundreds of people who don't have a place to go because there's just not room. And I'm hoping that one day soon that building gets built, because that stack will drop and that many lives will be saved, and that many souls will be saved. But they can always use feminine hygiene products, diapers, kids' toys, clothing, food. I mean, the Dream Center doesn't charge them anything. Everything that you need is provided 100% by the Dream Center. I mean, I've seen people come in who are so hooked on psychotropic medications for their mental illnesses, and the Dream Center helps them to break free from these psychotropic medications. And these people who were once deemed unemployable are working jobs at law firms and at doctors' offices, and their lives, their physical lives and their spiritual lives have been completely transformed. So if there's anybody who deserves to get a donation, it's the Dream Center.
And we hope to have Miss Gail on another episode. She's the director there at the Dream Center, and I've met her. She is a wonderful lady. Would do anything in the world for her, and she'd do anything in the world for you. Don't even have to know you, and she'll do it. And that's obvious with the ministry that she started there. So guys, again, go to dreamcenterjackson.com, learn more about the Dream Center and how you can get involved, how you can support them, whether it be through, financial support, donating items that they might need. And if you have any questions or have trouble getting in contact with anybody at the Dream Center, you can reach out to Kevin or I, kingdomeffectpodcast@gmail.com, and we will get you guys plugged in and connected with whoever that might be at the Dream Center. So Scott, man, thanks so much for being here tonight. Kevin, same thing, man. Always good to see you, man. You guys killed it on the comments tonight. That's probably the most we've had in a while. So always remember, continue to like, comment, and share on these posts so that we can get our message and get Scott's message in the Dream Center and get Christ out there to as many viewers as possible. Kevin, you got anything before we go?
man, I'm going to have to go find a quiet place because I'm going to have to process this for probably the next 2 hours.
Well, Kevin, it was great meeting you, and I look forward to possibly working with you in the future.
Absolutely, man. It's a done deal. We just got to figure it out. So it's good stuff.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us for the Kingdom Effect episode 13 with Glenn, Kevin, and Scott Thorson with the Dream Center. We'll catch you guys next time on the Kingdom Effect.